affect the whole city of Fredericton. And it's the proposed project of a mine in the Sissenbrook area. And I'm a bit confused, and I wonder what your party's analysis on the different aspects are. Some people say there are economic benefits. What's your party's analysis of that? Some people say that the tailings ponds contain toxic items that would bring disaster to the city if they broke. What's your party's analysis of that? Also, what is your party's estimate of the probability that that could happen? And the fourth part is that that land belongs to the Wolastoq people, okay? And what discussions has your party had with the Wolastoq people about that situation?
Excellent question.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And Sisson Mine was produced as one of these big projects that we're going to provide economic benefit to New Brunswick. And of all the 5, I think it's the only one left. All the other 4 are gone. There are some issues with Sisson Mine regarding, I think, what you described there, and that is the storage of the sediment. Tailing ponds, there's some concerns with that. I haven't heard any indications about dry storage, or if that's even possible, but there's definitely some disconcerting conditions related to the tailings pond. And we need to make sure that the environmental impact assessment is top-notch and provides whatever terms and conditions that they are safeguard the environment, because that, I believe, is foremost. I've been on these boards before, on the Planning Review and Adjustment Committee here in the region, and I was on the board that voted down a rock quarry in Durrant for that same reason. Not that there wasn't rock quarries already there, but this one was just gone too far to what the locals had to live with and for the environment itself. So I've definitely been on the side where we've had to make decisions, yes or no, and if Sisson Mine cannot satisfy an environmental impact assessment, and that includes negotiation with the First Nations, then certainly it should not be recommended.
Sir, was your question answered? Where are you?
Well, I did ask what discussions you've had with the Wolastoq people, and I assume you haven't had them.
Well, okay, that's why I would include that with the environmental impact assessment. And my understanding was originally there was a discussions and agreement, I think, with this government, but I don't know if that's the case right now.
Thank you. Chris?
Yes. To answer about the Wolastoq, discussion with the Wolastoq, our discussions have not been specifically on the Sisson Mine, but we have had a higher level discussion with them when we answered the questions that the Wolastoq chiefs posed to us, and in answering them, and this guides us in the Sisson Mine and any other issue, that anything related to the disposition or the use of crown lands on this unceded territory, we would use the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as our guide in making use of these lands. We're looking at the federal government implementing the declaration, and as well we have a pre-existing body of jurisprudence in this country that has really laid down that when it comes to the use of lands that Indigenous peoples have a possible claim on, and that's pretty much the entirety of New Brunswick, the governments have a duty to consult. And when it comes to the Sisson Mine project, I have never read anything that made me believe that there had been sufficient consultation with the First Nations. In terms of the tailing ponds, you know what? I'm a lawyer. I'm gonna flag when I'm out of my depth, and so I think we need science. We need science-based decision making, but we need to bear in mind whether it's Fukushima or any of the other, or Houston, we are coming in a period of intense climatic change, and we can't use the old models when deciding whether projects are safe. Our climate is going to push our infrastructure to its limits, and that must be kept in mind when we're making environmental decisions.
Thank you, Chris. David.
Thank you, Maggie. We need a new approach to consultation with First Nations in New Brunswick. There was no discussion with the communities involved, the Wolastoq communities, or with the Grand Council. It was just with the chiefs. And the chiefs are responsible for they're elected to oversee the management of their communities, not for the unceded territory across the lands here. So we need a new model for that, to have real consultation, and we need to do so under the context of peace and friendship treaties we should be operating under in New Brunswick, we signed, and two, fully adhering to the UN Declaration on Aboriginal Rights, UNDRIP. So we need to do that. But I think about this mine, I think about the Nashwauk watershed. And the Nashwauk watershed is the last really intact salmon bearing watershed in the St. John River system. There are only 200 salmon left in the St. John River system, from thousands upon thousands upon thousands in the past.
Can you speak up, David, please?
What? Well, it's the microphone, it's the problem. How's that? Better? So you know, we have a responsibility to protect that watershed, and to site a mine, open pit mine there, seems increasingly ludicrous to me, given the gem that the Nashwauk watershed is in the context of how degraded the rest of the St. John watershed has become. So I thought of this as I was attending the last meeting up in Stanley around this, because the decisions finally have not yet made. Environment Canada and DFO still have not made their final decision as whether or not that mine can destroy salmon and fish-bearing streams in the area. They haven't made that decision, so they still have not got the go-ahead for the mine. If that mine went ahead, the only way it could go ahead in my mind that would protect the watershed would be if they use dry stack storage. They can't have tailings ponds. They're going to pose a risk to the Nashwauk watershed. That's a deal breaker right there. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much for the question. I think David highlighted one of the areas of deficiency with this process, but there's a second one that I think we should highlight. So the first you mentioned was the process of consultation with the First Nations and Indigenous communities. And he's right, it went through chiefs, and chiefs have been engaging with the province and with the developer on this for quite some time, but not in a way that accesses or that recognizes the full scope of the unceded territory and the people to whom they were first founders there. The second area of problem is with the environmental impact assessment. So there's a process in place for environmental impact assessments, and it's flawed and it's weak. Speaking as someone who used to do environmental impact assessments, there's a ton of holes there. And so right now we're using this process to assess a whole number of different resource development applications, and we're pushing people through, and they're getting, in this case, the Sisson mine has 40 different conditions attached to their environmental impact assessment, which creates a huge host of challenges to monitor to make sure that they don't break provincial rules. So the province will not allow untreated water into our watershed. Can we trust that with these conditions in place through this EIA process, that's going to be the case? And then it goes over to the federal government, who have their own EA process, that they're just in the steps of completing. But do any of these give us what we need to believe that if that tailings dam fails, that we haven't ruined the Nashwauk watershed? And how do we evaluate through, as Chris pointed out, good science, the possibility of that happening, and how we mitigate for it, and whether engineering and this terrifyingly high dam wall, if anyone's seen the scale drawings of it, it's ridiculous, the structure that's looking like it's going to be built out in the middle of nowhere. But our EIA process is how it is, and it needs fixing along with our consultation process so we don't end up in this point for future projects.
Thank you. This is something I have absolutely no information on at the current time. I just know for myself, my brother's Peter Clark, lives on the Nashwauk, and he's a salmon fisherman. I just know that we have to be very, very careful with anything that's going to be affect our environment, and that should be the priority. what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to the People's Alliance and find out if they have had any consultation with the community, the Wolastoq community, and find out the facts, because I don't really have enough to make a decision on that. But I definitely support the environment first.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, next question, please. And we're right on just about 9 o'clock, so have to be quick.
Start the boogie.
This is when I get to tell you.
Okay, my name is Jean-Louis. I live in Skyline Acres, and I'm here at the mic as a director of the Friends of Mount Carlton Provincial Park. And my question is in regards to the Clean Environment Act. I know it's flawed, as Susan mentioned, but it's the only thing that we have. And it's the one piece of legislation which exists out there to help protect our environment from degradation, which protects us from cancer. I want to give you an example of a situation that I experienced very recently. In 2016, the New Brunswick Department of Tourism filed with Department of Environment, a proposal to develop a snowmobile grooming hub at Mount Carlton Provincial Park. One of the most important elements of this project consisted of 2 bridges. Without the bridges, there's no grooming hub. A few days before the project was registered for an EIA, the bridges suddenly disappeared from the project proposal. When we found out, we immediately made an appointment to meet with the EIA manager. We sent letters to the minister, and we all got a response saying, "Dear sir, the snowmobile bridges are independent from the snowmobile grooming hub." It's like saying that tuna does no longer belong in a tuna sandwich. As a result of access to information and going to court in order to be able to access the information, I discovered that 3 government departments had conspired to have the bridges exempted. And they lied about it and tried everything in their power to cover up their lies. They got together, 3 departments, transportation, environment, and tourism, basically to cover up a story that the bridges had in fact been exempted from the Clean Environment Act. So given the fact that this took place under the watch of our chief law officer for the province, the Attorney General, I am very concerned. I don't think, based on the experience that I've had, that the Clean Environment Act is worth the paper that it's written on. And I would want to ask questions of the panel, what will you do if elected to bring back into the government integrity, transparency, and reciprocity so that nobody gets to be above the law?
Thank you. Great question. Okay, I think Chris, you're on first.
All right. Well, I'm happy you asked about integrity and transparency in government. I'm a former employee of the Ontario Ombudsman's Office. So when I was doing that job, that was essentially my job, enforcing these things. And I've been disheartened that we have heard so little about the recommendations of Charles Murray, our ombuds in this province, about what he has been asking for to make the ombuds a stronger office. He has been asking for a double-blind complaint process to be put in place. And that what that means is when we depend on whistleblowers to flag serious issues happening within our government. And he wants to make it possible for someone to file a complaint with the Ombuds Office without revealing their identity to the Ombuds Office. Now, Charles is an expert in these things. It takes a long time to groom and grow trust with people because they're working inside our government to blow the whistle because they know the consequences can be heavy. And they take great personal risks to bring forward the information that we as citizens know. The NDP is committing putting in place the reforms that Charles is asking for. Charles is also asking for additional funding to his office for just a small advertising campaign among the public service to ensure that they are aware that he is a resource for them and that he can protect their identities while listening to their concerns. And so I completely agree with you. There are dubious things that happen inside of our government, and we need to empower people to come forward.
Thank you for your answer. David.
Well, the leadership has to come from the top to begin with, to say this is going to be an open government. There's not going to be any daylight between the people and the government. The work of the government, the business of the government is the work of the people, is the business of the people. That has to be a clear message sent from the top. So when people ask for information from the government, they receive it. Not force them to go to the Right to Information Act, they get provided the information they request. Now, when you go to the Right to Information Act, it's been so badly amended over the years that it no longer actually ensures a right to information. That's what it's called, right to information, but there's no actual right to information in the substance of that act anymore. So we would amend that to restore to its original form, which basically was based on the principle that everything is available except for very few things that fit into some narrow exclusions. So we would change that. And so that the RTI would start working. So you wouldn't have to be forced into a court, as I have been a number of times, when the Integrity Commissioner or the Right to Information Commissioner has recommended on appeal and her investigation or his investigation more recently that information be released that I've been requested as an MLA under Right to Information, and the Minister has said no. And then I've had to go to court, and because of the way the Act is written now, I'm losing those cases, and the judge is saying no. So the information remains secret, which is a big problem. When you're a lot of talk and little substance in action, you got to keep a high level of secrecy, because people are going to find out you're not really doing what you say you're doing. So finally, on the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, I would set up a law reform committee in the Legislative Assembly so that law reform happens in public and is driven by public interest, so that people can come in and talk about bills and how to improve them that are not working for us, that are not serving us. So that's done in the open and not in the bowels of some government department and the Justice and Attorney General's office. So that would be a big change, so we could overhaul legislation in public with public input.
Thank you. Susan.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question, Jean-Louis. This is the whole reason why I'm getting into politics, and I said at the beginning, I believe there is a better way, and that is the open government model, and it includes open data, so making data available, readily available, so that it doesn't have to be asked for. It includes open policy development with the people, just as you described. So if you have groups in tourism and DTI and others, and community groups and snowmobilers, they're around a table together in a public forum where we work out solutions that are collaborative and that people can accept. So it's something that I've been doing as a civil servant for the last 3 years, working through summits that are public, that anybody can attend, that are broadcast, where we talk about issues, we look at what government should do, and we agree together to move them forward. We need that kind of example around the table so that the next time the minister is asked, the minister might say yes and might say, here's the data. That's what I want to bring to the party and to government, is a new model of politics. It's all about that kind of open, collaborative decision-making and open data. So I think we need new politicians and a new system to do that. It's started. There are little pockets in government where it's happening. We need it to happen faster. We need it to come forward tomorrow, not 4 years from now, not 8 years from now. We need this change to be put in place now, and this is pretty much the entire reason why I'm running, is because we need to change how we govern to react to modern society and include the public together as partners in the decisions that you talk about.
Jean-Louis, is that an answer for you?
Not really, because by the time we get to the stage that you're at, and I think it's a noble, forgive me, a noble dream, but there's a long way between what we're at now and what you're proposing. So how do we get rid, and I'm going to use the word, how do we get rid of the current corruption within government?
Can I continue with that, or is
Where are we with time?
I'll just finish.
Okay,
Does she want to say something?
go ahead.
I'd love to, because I think it is happening now. There's pockets where it's happening. We have things like the Economic Immigration Lab, where we're having that conversation in public. We're doing things like the Craft Beer Lab. We're building policy together with people out in the open. That's the kind of change that I've been bringing into the bureaucracy, and it can happen more as I encourage my colleagues and other MLAs to do the same and show them the example. So that I know it seems like a dream, but it's not going to happen tomorrow without new people like me who are bringing and embracing this idea into government.